On Friday, the 2nd of August 2019, a Christian wake was held in honor of Chief Mrs. Victoria Adenike Akinyele, who slept in the Lord at the age of 85. The church service, which was held at St. Jude's Anglican Church, Magodo GRA, Lagos, was filled to capacity as family members, friends and well-wishers of the Akinyeles gathered to pay their last respects to their matriarch, Chief Mrs. Victoria Adenike Akinyele, a woman who has been described as an epitome of diligence and selflessness. Chief Mrs. Victoria Adenike Akinyele was born on the 14th of April 1934 to Chief David Aluko Fawekun and Mrs. Marybake Fawekun as the first of the 4 children of her parents. Young Adenike had her early education at Ido Public School in 1950 and later proceeded to Anglican Modern School Adenike from 1953 to 1954. Mrs. Victoria Adenike Akinyele was trained as a teacher at Government Women Teacher Training College, Ilesha from 1955 to 1956, after which she started her teaching career and rose to the position of head teacher in 1981. The last few years of her teaching career between 1990 and 1991 was spent at Okekoto Primary School in Agege. She later retired in 1991 from the Lagos State Teaching Service. Chief Mrs. Victoria Adenike Akinyele was an industrious and energetic woman who combined teaching with business. She was also an influential person that attracted people to herself through diligence and honesty. She was very caring and accommodating. She lived a huge part of her life serving humanity and has left behind wonderful legacies. To kickstart the service in honor of the late Chief Mrs. Victoria Adenike Akinyele, the choir led the congregation in a series of hymnal renditions. As children of the late Chief Mrs. Victoria Adenike Akinyele read portions from the Bible intermittently. Mr. Digbo Akinyele read from the book of Ecclesiastes chapter 3 verse 1 to 15, and Mr. Taye Akinyele read from 1 Thessalonians chapter 4 verse 13 to 18, which centered on life after death. Goodwill messages followed afterwards as different people said amazing things about the deceased. Mrs. Abisola Uyedotun Ne Akinyele, who spoke on behalf of the children, took the congregation on a trajectory of the last days of her mother. She described her mother as a disciplined woman who was very detailed and generous, saying she was a lover of Christ who puts the things of God first.
After mommy died, a very close friend of ours, some of our children are here today, came crying into the house. She said at the beginning of the year in the village, mommy had given her 50,000 naira, that there will be fees, there will be dues, there will be offerings to make. She should be making offerings from that for her. She said she answered mommy at 50,000. At the most, at the end of the year, maybe 20,000. Mommy said, "Sha, don't do it, it's all for me. If there's anything we need to pay money on, please make sure you pay my own too. Even if they're just collecting something, pay my own. And then give me an account and later when we see away." And the woman said, "I have 35,000 naira yet unspent from your mother's money." We said, "Mommy, and this it is going to be well." So you see, this woman, my mother, had prepared herself, and she gave many lessons, left many lessons for us, that we should be prepared at all times. There's nobody who knows the time, there's nobody who knows the moment when he will come like a thief in the night. I learned many lessons from the last few hours, the last few days of my mother, because She just did what she needed to do. And I know I've been prone to procrastination. I don't think there are many like me in this gathering. But that was one major lesson I take away from my mother. May God bless you all. Thank you.
Engineer Olusegun Falaye, who said Chief Mrs. Victoria Adenike Akinyele was a mother figure to him, described her as a non-discriminatory woman who cared for both her biological and non-biological children equally. He added that even in his adulthood, he still lived with her, showing how caring the late Chief Mrs. Victoria Adenike Akinyele was. He prayed that God should grant her eternal rest in his bosom.
I left it in 1983 to join Mama at Adenike. I lived with Mama for 12 years. During these 12 years, I graduated from a boy to big man. I got married with Mama. Who is Mama to me? When I was coming from Ekiti, I said, I'm going to meet my uncle and his wife. So in Ekiti, we call it, they will call me Omoko. In which case, mommy will respect me. So that was what the impression I was carrying when I was coming to Lagos. When I now got to Adenike, I now look back, this has to shame you. Because mommy will put all of us together as one. No discrimination of any kind. We have only 3 rules. Daddy and mommy, they will live in one room. Boys, one room. Girls, another room. We are all here today. Praise the Lord. Mommy made sure that they brought a lot of us, especially Usikabu, descended together. And we live with her in harmony. I thank Almighty God for a well-spent life in service to God and to humanity.
Chief Oladipupo, who represented the Elders Forum of the Church, also spoke of Chief Mrs. Victoria Adenike Akinyele's attitude to work, describing her as a woman who loved and served God until her demise. Mr. Lanre Olayinka, in company of his wife, spoke a lot about the impact his mother-in-law had on him, as well as how her commitment to the things of Christ made him change his faith, stressing that Chief Mrs. Victoria Adenike Akinyele was a good mother and a wife to her husband.
On Sunday, she will go to 6:30. To whom what you want to play no church. Oh, get an church is 6:30. I want this. No, that's not church. That habit of discipline. Because you do nothing, you take nothing. Absolutely, if you like, have 500 houses, have 1,000 wives, have whatever you want, have. But the day the Lord comes, I surrender. You take nothing. Absolutely nothing. So all this will be vanity upon vanity. People gather here, they don't come because of the children. They don't come because of it, but they come because of Mama. And they come because of what Mama did in her lifetime. The legacy. All we need to do, and the congregation to do for us, is pray with us, so that we're able to sustain our legacy. Do well, give well, empower people, and do not expect anything back. For once God is ready. Thank you.
The sermon for the service, which was delivered by the Venerable Arire Kolawole of Ikosi Archdeaconry of the Anglican Communion, spoke on how to number our days and prepare for life after death. He reminded the congregation that our existence on earth is only temporary compared to life after death. Venerable Arire Kolawole also spoke highly of the late Chief Mrs. Victoria Adenike Akinyele and urged her children to keep her legacies alive.
Mama lived so long to the glory of God.
this evening that it does not end here. No matter how long we live here, it's just a short while. No matter how long we live here, it's just an infinitesimal fraction of the time we will spend in eternity. In which case we are encouraging ourselves this evening that no matter what becomes of us here, where we are going thereafter should be our key focus. Brethren, we are reminding ourselves this evening that what we are pilgrims, we are sojourners, we are travelers, in which case, no matter how long a traveler stays in a country he or she visited, he or she will still need to come back home. This world is not our home. We are all passers by.
Thereafter, Venerable Enoch Nsei prayed for members of the Akinyele family, after which Mr. Babatokpe Akinyele gave the vote of thanks on behalf of the family. He appreciated all for honoring their mother with their presence and prayed God grants everyone journey mercies back to their various destinations.
My mother actually insisted on me to be confirmed, and he was the one that confirmed me in this church. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, everybody. God bless you all. Thanks for coming.
Thereafter was a reception at the premises of St. Jude Anglican Church, Magodo GRA, Lagos, as guests wined, dined, and danced to the beautiful medleys provided by the band. From Biscon Communications, we bid the late Chief Mrs. Victoria Adenike Akinyele farewell and wish her eternal rest in the bosom of her Lord. Amen.